And we are live. Paul, can you hear me?
Hi, I do hear you. Hi.
So, a quick reminder about what Pride in the Living Room is all about. So, this project was founded by the Israeli LGBT task force, Agudah, in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv gay center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And Agudah founded this project to offer a voice and a stage to LGBT Jews from around the world uh, to encourage empathy and community. And with me, I have Paul, all the way from Yafo in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Tel Aviv, yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Um, so we might get started by going back to the beginning. Uh,
Okay.
And if I ask a question and memories and ideas come back, then feel free to run with that as well. Uh, so tell me about your life growing up in a Jewish environment.
Okay. So I grew up in quite an Orthodox community, modern Orthodox, not like Haredi or anything. I grew up in quite an Orthodox setting. I went to a Jewish primary school and a Jewish nursery school, and so quite religious, I guess. I went to school wearing a kippah, and with tzitzit, we said prayers in the morning and afternoon. We said Birchot Hamazon, like grace after meals every day, like kind of full on. Not because my parents were so religious, but more because they wanted my brother and I to grow up. They wanted us to kind of grow up with the knowledge, you know. So I learned to read Hebrew at the same time as I learned to read English, stuff like that. But there was never any kind of issues around being gay. You know, like there was never like I was never taught it was wrong or anything like that. It wasn't like I said, we weren't. My family aren't particularly like they're traditional rather than religious. I'm probably the most religious out of them actually, and so yeah. So that's how I kind of grew up, I suppose. I didn't go to a Jewish secondary school because I got into like a better school basically. So I didn't do that. Um, so, um, so when I came out when I was 15, which was kind of early at the time because it was 1999. And really that wasn't a problem. Like not a huge problem. Because I don't know, I'd never been told that it was wrong or anything like that. And it was like at the dawn of the internet. Do you know what I mean? Like 1999 was kind of when people started kind of really getting into the internet, you know? Does that make sense? So there was like gay.com, for example, which was kind of before Gaydar, which was before Grindr. Like I'm making myself sound very old at the moment, but that's how it was. It was really new. Everything was very new, and there were chat rooms, and there were people, and so I started talking to people, I suppose, online, and then not like meeting people, just like talking to people. But still, at the time, 15 was quite young, and I remember I met this guy who took me to London, and he just kind of took me to these like clubs and these bars. Now looking back, I was 15, so maybe this wasn't really appropriate. At the time, I didn't think that much of it. But we went to like bars and clubs in Soho, and I just felt myself kind of breathe, you know, because it was like, wow, there's other people. And I kind of ended up becoming a little bit of a scene queen for the next kind of 5 years of my life. Anyway, so yeah, so I suppose the sort of, and not because of a religious thing, but I suppose the kind of the Jewish aspect of my life started to take more of a backstage. after my bar mitzvah, I sort of didn't really go to, I didn't go to shul as much, like to synagogue as much anyway. But, it just didn't really, again, I went to an Orthodox synagogue, so it didn't really meld very well. I didn't really meld very well with my, like, being gay and being in an Orthodox community. Not that anyone would ever have said anything, because it wasn't really, like, no one was like that, like I never grew up like that. But I suppose that was what happened. When I went to university, I joined the Jewish Society and I joined the LGBT, because, again, that's how old I am. There was no T at the time. We added the T. And I was really involved. I became the social sec of the LGBT and then LGBT. I joined the JSOC, but to be honest, it wasn't because I didn't want to be involved in Jewish stuff. It was more because I knew everybody. Like, Britain has a very small Jewish community. And so there's only something like 250, 300,000 Jews in the whole country, in a country of like 60 million people or something. And so I joined the JSOC, and it's big because I went to the University of Leeds, and it's the most popular university in the country, especially for Jews. It's normally Leeds, Manchester and Birmingham. But, like, I just thought, I've moved 200 miles away from home, and I did not do that to hang out with the same people I've known since I was 8. Do you know what I mean? And so I just decided that I got more involved in, like, musical theatre society, and not to be a stereotype, gay Jew involved in musical theatre. But I did. I got involved in the musical theatre society, and I got involved in the LGBT. And the JSOC kind of took a step back, So yeah, so that was university, I suppose. And really, I was always involved. I was always quite, I suppose, religious to a point. Religious, not like, again, when I say religious, I mean, I believe in God, and I always did, like, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, I always was like kosher, like Pesach kosher. So then I was with a guy for, actually before that, I studied abroad a lot. I studied languages, so I lived in Russia for a bit, and I lived in Berlin. And in Russia, my problem was that everyone was, the sort of Jewish side of things was they were too religious for me. I didn't feel like I fit in with the community, and I was there with this other Jewish guy who just so happened to be the only other Jewish person at the university I was studying at. Just so happened to be opposite me in the halls, and he was this Australian sort of. Well, he was born in Israel and then moved to Australia, and we got on really well. And he grew up very kind of. He grew up in a Haredi community. And so when we went there, he was really comfortable and they loved him. And I was kind of the heathen next to him, which was strange. But in that part of my life, I suppose the thing is that it took me until I was about 30 before both parts of my life kind of came together. I think subconsciously, I always made some kind of decision where it was either more gay or more Jewish, and until I was probably 30, 31. And actually, it was when I met an ex-partner of mine, because he was part of the progressive movement in the UK, like really involved. And so when we met, I think something clicked in my head. I just realized that both of those things can come together, and that I can be gay in a Jewish space. I never thought that I couldn't be Jewish in a gay space. Although I often found it really problematic. I found people would say some things to me which I didn't agree with. There were some anti-Semitic comments made on the gay scene. I was called Jewish Paul because there were like 5 Pauls. And so how can we differentiate? Oh, let's call them Black Paul, White Paul, Jewish Paul. Like, it was And I was like, don't call me Jewish, Paul. Like, no. I was in one of my friends' phone as Gay Paul at university, even though I'd known her for 3 years and she knew my name. But yeah, it took until I met my now ex, who I was with for about 5 years, to go to a synagogue where the 2 rabbis, there were 3 rabbis, 2 of them were women and 1 of them was gay. And I think that was some kind of revelation to me. I'd never really thought about it. And it meant that suddenly I felt like I could get more involved. And I did. I got really involved in the community. I started teaching at the Agudah. I started feeling more like I kind of belonged a bit more. And being part of the progressive community just opened my life up a bit. Suddenly I thought, actually, I am religious. Like, just because I don't wear a kippah all the time, and just because rabbis don't wear kippahs all the time, you know, just because I don't, you know, I have certain ideas on kashrus and stuff like that, that's okay. That's okay. I can still, you know. So then suddenly I felt very religious again. And I was the head teacher of a cheder at a different community, and I got very involved in the Jewish community. And I guess, in a way, less so in the sort of the scene, but I think I kind of vaguely outgrown it. I didn't live in central London. I didn't live very close in London anymore. But I kind of had this nice, like connection to both, which I liked. And then I moved to Israel. So I moved to Israel in January. And it's been weird because, like, again, I've just got used to being sort of like saying to people that I was religious and feeling that was okay. And then you come to Israel and the word like religious, like dati, is a very specific kind of thing. So obviously I'm not Haredi. So I'm not counted as religious. I don't wear a kippah, I'm not Orthodox, so I don't count as religious. So you know, if you tell people you're religious, they automatically assume that you wear a kippah, because everyone's Jewish here, right? And so it's strange because, I mean, obviously not everyone's Jewish here, but what I mean is lots of people here are Jewish. It's the kind of, suddenly I'm not the minority anymore. And it's good because actually in the UK, one of the reasons I came here was to be able to have both sides of myself. I would say in the last 5 years, I've found it more difficult being Jewish than being gay in the UK. When I was younger, I always worried about coming out as being gay because like, again, it was the 90s and the noughties, and there wasn't as much exposure to the gay community at the time. There wasn't on every Netflix thing, which I think is amazing. And so I always worried about coming out as gay because you thought you'd get a bad reaction. And I would say in the last 7 years, maybe, somewhere between 5 and 10, in the last 7 years, actually, I've been more nervous telling people that I'm Jewish than telling people that I'm gay. Because I've had a lot of bad reactions. I've had people blame me for blowing up Palestinian babies. I've had people, even though, at least now I live in Israel, but as an Ashkenazi, you know, Jew whose family haven't been to Israel, lived in Israel for 2,000 years, I thought that was a bit uncalled for. My ex was a writer and wrote a play called One Jewish Boy, which was in London, and he had people drawing swastikas over his posters and sending death threats. And I had someone call me a derogatory term on the street. I had one guy, and this is not, what I should say is that these are not things that happened over a 10, 20-year period. These are things that happened in a sort of 2-year period, like once a month. Someone put a thing through our letterbox with 4 A4 sheets of paper with writing of YouTube videos with like Jewish conspiracy theories, you know, the Illuminati are all Jews, and what the Jews really about, and blah, blah, like 4 pages. And I don't mean like written like this, I mean written like this, and then when he ran out of space, he turned the page around and he wrote it across the top, and then he turned it that way and wrote it across that side, like packed. And he put that into our letterbox. And that's scary. You know, that's really scary. And what else do we have? Lots of things, all the time. One guy I told started asking me if I believed in this conspiracy theory about 9/11 and how the Jews had done this. Anyway, so it got to a point where it went from worrying about being called a faggot or a puff shouted at me holding my boyfriend's hand walking down the road or standing outside a club. That used to be a problem. And it's like, that stopped or calmed down at least. And suddenly I was getting direct stuff for being Jewish. And then there was this, so me and my ex were talking about thinking about children, because we've been together for sort of almost 5 years and we were going to get married and stuff. I mean, thank God we didn't, because we split up. But we went to an adoption agency, and and this isn't like directly anti-Semitic particularly, but they basically told me that we wouldn't get a child because we were Jewish. And they even said to us, well, how Jewish are you? And I was like, like what kind of question is that? It's like, well, do you like have a Christmas tree? And I said, no, I don't have a Christmas tree. Oh yeah, well then that could be a problem. It's like, well, how Jewish are you? I was like, well, I applied to be a rabbi 2 years ago, and I'm the head teacher of Agudah. He goes, well, do you like go to the synagogue? I was like, yeah. Oh yeah, that could be a problem. So I would have to get a child, I would have to give up my Jewishness and my Judaism to get a baby. Because in Britain, the only thing that a child's birth parents can veto on is based on religion. And I said, right. And they said, and you know, people want their children to grow up with Christmas and birthdays and things. I said, they're not really Christian. They just want to. And I said, hang on a second, let me get this right. I can't bring up a child who needs a family in a stable, financially secure family with big support system, a beautiful community, history, you know, richness, and in a family that will love it, in a like lovely 3-bedroom house with a white picket, literally a white picket fence, and a dog, and a garden, and all these things. And you know, and at the time I was earning plenty of money and stuff, and it was like, I can't look up a child because some woman who will never see her child again, who is apparently not, and I didn't judge this, but is apparently not fit enough to look after a child. She wants her kid, who she will never see again, to put plastic shit on a tree once a year. And she said, basically, yes. And that's when I decided to leave the UK. That was like, done. I'm done. Because it was like, we'd been thinking about moving to Israel on and off, and I'd not taken it seriously. But that was the moment I was like, do you know what? Screw this. And don't get me wrong, there's political issues here. Of course there are, and things that happen I do not agree with. And, you know, there's lots of that sort of stuff. And the gay rights here are not amazing, you know, because we do have to fight against the religious communities who have too much power in the parliament. And that's a problem. But if I can't have a kid in the UK, and I can't have a kid here, at least here, no one's going to say stuff like that to me, you know? No one's going to do that. And I live, and regardless of the rights here, like, this city is like 20% LGBT. I feel much more comfortable here than I feel anywhere else in the world, because every house has a mezuzah and every street has a rainbow flag. And it's the only place in the world like that. The only place in the world. And now that I'm here, I can't believe I didn't do it sooner. Like, I cannot believe I waited until I was 36 to come here, because I've never felt more comfortable. Because it really is like both sides of myself are in one place. And, you know, yeah, I suppose that's kind of the story up to now. And there are issues, and like, I moved here like 2 months before the world decided to end. But I sort of feel like if the world's going to end, at least I'm in the Holy Land. I'll give myself half a chance. Do you know what I mean? But I feel much more comfortable, and even though like I don't get to meet as many people, and my Hebrew isn't as good as I wanted it to, because I didn't get to go to Ulpan for as long as I wanted to, and I'm looking for a job, and there's like no jobs for what I do, and it's terrible, and this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. I'm still more comfortable here, And I've made better friends here, I would say, in the last 8 months than I ever made in the UK. Ever. Because I was always different. In the gay community, I was always Jewish. And in the Jewish community, I was always the gay one. And this is the only place where actually I feel like all of my friends are like, I don't feel like a minority. Really. And it's the first time in my life. How's that?
Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your story. I've interviewed various people who have made Aliyah to Israel, and they all have slightly different reasons for being there, and they've all had slightly different experiences. But I think a common theme is, as you say, there's often this feeling of being a Jewish minority in gay spaces and being a gay minority in Jewish spaces. Yeah. And the Jewish gay group is, I would argue, in Israel or possibly in America, would be the biggest in the world. So it's amazing that you've been able to find that.
Yeah, and I think it's important because it's not just about like finding a husband, right? You know, like it's just about feeling. No, look, let's not be silly. Lots of people do it. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's about being in a space where I feel comfortable, yeah, and that's what really matters. Like you said, I've always felt like I was outside, and actually here I don't. And okay, look, I know that there is, like, here I'm an ole, you know, like I'm an immigrant at the end of the day. But it's different because being a Jewish immigrant, like an ole chadash here, is not frowned upon. You know, like, and there's lots of us from all over the place. So I have friends from Poland and Britain and, you know, America, obviously, and, you know, and Israel. And the better my Hebrew gets, the more Israeli friends I will get and things like that. But yeah, they're people who kind of really actually care, you know? Like, I've moved abroad, like I said, I've lived abroad before as well. And unless you want to, like, have sex with them or take drugs with them, people don't want to be your friends in the gay scene. In London, in Berlin, in lots of places. And here I haven't found, I mean, there's still issues with that everywhere. But I felt like here, I've just felt, I've met people, like, I've met friends here, actually message me to see if I'm okay, and not if I want to hook up. You know, like, they message me just to say, hi, how are you doing? And I message them, and we meet up not because they want to have sex, and not because they want to do whatever. They meet up because they're my friends. And it's really hard to find people like that. And I've moved around a lot. And even at university, like, I studied languages. So, like, I went to university for 2 years and then I left to go to Moscow. And when I came back, all of my friends were gone. All of them. And then when I went to Berlin for 6 months, and all the other people that I knew, they were all gone. And so because people kept leaving, I never had, like, a group of friends. After my second year, I never had a group of friends. And then I moved around. I went to London, then I went to Leeds, then I went to Essex, then I went to Berlin. And I moved around so much. I never created this, like, group of friends that were really friends with me. And I wouldn't say that I have that here yet. But, you know, I still have friends who message and ask me if I'm okay, especially at the moment. And it's nice because you don't feel like you're on your own.
That is, you know, it is a tough situation when you are gay and you are, you know, entering into that world. And I've heard from so many people that they feel it is challenging to find deep, you know, deep connections in the gay community because they feel a lot of it is surface level, superficial, as you say.
It is.
Well, you didn't use the word superficial, but that's my reading of what you've said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if if there's something different about Israeli culture that makes that happen, or just the people you've
I think
interacted
it
with.
is.
That's really fascinating you say that.
I think Israeli culture is like, I think I think Jewish communities are really kind of like family orientated and community orientated, and the Israeli community is just a really big Jewish community. People want to help you here. You know, like you meet some random person and tell them you're looking for a job, and they're like, "I'll give you your CV. I'll send it to my friend." No one would do that in Britain. Nobody. No one cares enough to do that. You know, everyone wants to help you. And look, there are issues, obviously, and there are culture shocks. But actually, what I've realised since I've been here is that I'm more Jewish than I am British, because the things that the things that Israelis say they hate about Israelis, right? Well, this is what Israelis say they hate about Israelis. They're like, oh, everyone's like really aggressive and rude. I was like, yeah, but what you have to understand is that when I was in Britain, I was the slightly aggressive, overly opinionated, probably quite abrupt, sometimes a bit offensive Jewish boy, right? Because Jews are a bit like that, like culturally we can be kind of like forceful and opinionated, and we grow up learning. Like I grew up in a really big, very tight Jewish community. And when I went to university, and people used to say, "You're really opinionated," I was like, "Thank you." Like you're saying, it feels like a nice thing to say. It doesn't feel like you're being nice to me, because that's how we grew up at my dinner table, like talking about stuff and saying, "Shut up, you're talking rubbish." No. And people get very offended when you talk to them like that, and I couldn't work out why, right? And so I suppose I was always this kind of like very opinionated, like slightly aggressive, like Jew. And here I'm like the nice, lovely, sweet, polite British boy, like, because I'm not nearly as aggressive and abrupt and opinionated as they are. I would never say half the stuff they say. But, there's some. Also, I'm really pale, which I think here makes me exotic. I don't know. But this is the best tan I've ever had, and I just basically look human, So
well, I know that for many people around the world, the tanned Israeli muscly look is the exotic
it
thing.
is, but not when you're here and everyone's tanned and dark and everything. I'm like, people used to paint their face to look like this. I'm like porcelain. So I'm just 200 years out of my time. 200 years ago, people used to powder their faces to look as pale as I am. Oh dear.
So you mentioned that
born in the Regency period.
Sorry?
I should have been born in the Regency period in France or something.
So you mentioned that you are a linguist or a historian?
Yes. No, I'm a linguist. Yeah, I studied German, Russian, Spanish, and French.
Wow.
I'm fluent in German. My Russian is okay. Actually, I've spoken more Russian here in the last 10 months than I've probably spoken in the last 10 years. So I was in a taxi, like when I first got here, and I hadn't really learned much Hebrew. I was in a taxi and I spoke to this guy, and I saw on his phone that it was in Russian. So I was like, "Oh, good, I can talk to you." I was talking to him, and at one point I told him I wanted to go and like do Hebrew lessons, and he was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Because I'm in Israel." And he's like, "Oh, you speak Russian, you speak English, you don't need to speak Hebrew."
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of Russian people here. It's good. So it's good because when I can't get by in Hebrew, often there's someone who speaks Russian at least, or English.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's useful. But my Hebrew is getting better.
It's good to hear. So you mentioned that being in Israel, because everyone's Jewish, then your Jewishness. Yeah, not everyone, but there's enough Jews for it to be sort of not something to fight for or something to sort of actively have to portray, but it's something that sort of exists.
Yeah.
Putting the Hanukkah up isn't making a political statement. It's just being part of the dominant culture.
not having to
So
take off Christmas and Easter, for example. Like being able to take
yeah,
off it, taking off the holidays that I should be taking off, rather than having to work. Having to take my holiday days off, like a week's worth of holiday off, just to observe Jewish holidays.
right.
People here don't get that. They don't understand why that's so much nicer. You know, finishing on Thursdays so that Shabbat is free. Because even if you don't want to do anything for Shabbat, it's nice to have Shabbat off.
Mm.
You know?
So what's it like being I mean, you touched on this a little bit, but what's it like being gay in Israel compared to London?
I mean, I can't talk about what it's like being gay in Israel because I live in Tel Aviv. So I can only comment on what it's like to be gay in Tel Aviv. And it's like probably the most liberal place I've lived. And I've lived in Berlin. You know, it really is. You know, like there are, like I said, every street there's a rainbow flag somewhere. And not because it's pride, just because it's, you know, someone kind of from the queer community is putting out a rainbow flag. Because they live here. There's one on like my building. I don't know who he is. I'm sure I'd find him on Grindr. No, I haven't looked. No, but seriously, like at the end of my building, there's a rainbow flag. I don't know who it is. I don't know who he is, but you know, there's one there. And then you go down the road towards like where I go to the doctors, and there's one there, and then just everyone. And it just makes, I don't know, something in the back of your head just kind of relaxes a little bit more. You know, there are still probably certain areas. Like I live in Jaffa, which is like I wouldn't necessarily walk holding hands further into Jaffa, maybe in certain areas of like Tel Aviv. But I would say generally, as a rule, in most of Tel Aviv, I would feel more comfortable walking, holding hands. Like no one flinches, no one looks if you're holding hands with someone. And in London, most people don't, but people do. You know, people stare at you on the escalator in the tube, and people like, even though it's like supposedly one of the most sort of liberal Western countries and it's the capital city, and people still do. But here, actually, in the middle of the Middle East, you know, it's like no one cares.
So what do the gay Tel Avivians think about religiosity?
I think it
Religious
depends who you
Jews.
ask, really. The thing is that people in Israel don't have to cling to their Jewishness in the same way as you do if you live in the diaspora. Because in the diaspora, the only way you kind of, here, you can be secular and still be Jewish because it's like when you live anywhere else and you're not really Christian, but you still celebrate Christmas and Easter. It's the same thing. But here, they're not religious. And they still celebrate Hanukkah. They still get together on Rosh Hashanah. They still get together on Leila Seder, like for Pesach, you know, because that's what they do. That's their culture. It's not a religious statement. It doesn't make you religious, like having those days off. It doesn't make you religious having a Chanukiah. It doesn't make you religious. Do you know what I mean? Because everywhere, that's just culture here. Whereas in the diaspora, doing those things, not having a Christmas tree, but having a Chanukiah, like you said, it's almost a political statement, or it's almost like and it used to be for me, you know, like I used to, in December, would put up, on my computer, I would have, I'd print out like a little Chanukiah, and every day I would put a thing on. And scared people would look at me like, what is that? But they wouldn't ask me about it. They would just be like, what's he doing? What's he doing? You know? And couldn't work out why I didn't want to put tinsel around my computer. Why you want to put tinsel? I just don't get tinsel. Anyway. And so, yeah, it's strange because secular people here are the equivalent of kind of like the people in diaspora who would say, well, we're traditional, but yeah, we're quite religious, but we're traditional more than religious, you know? But what's good about, and why it's important here, is because you can be secular and still be Jewish. You know, culturally, ethnically, religiously, whatever, you can do that. If you're in the diaspora, what happens is you end up kind of, you end up, when you don't do those things, you end up having a Christmas tree. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a Christmas tree, by the way. But what I'm saying is that you end up not caring about any of those things, and it makes you different, which makes you a little bit uncomfortable, which means that you don't do it because you say, I'm not religious. I don't eat kosher, so I'm not really Jewish. I don't do this, so I'm not really Jewish. So, well, I was born Jewish, but I don't do that. And then I think what happens is that you end up, you know, meeting someone who's not Jewish, and you go out with them, and that's great and everything, but it's easier to forget about your stuff because it makes you different and it makes things uncomfortable. And then it disappears with you. You know, the kind of Jewishness in your family disappears, and then there's no more Jews. Nice is that here you can be secular. You don't have to believe in God if you don't want to, but you still do Pesach and you still do the traditions. And, you know, not necessarily, because Hanukkah is not like a religious festival.
Right. So what you're saying is you can be a secular gay guy and still have Jewishness as part of your life.
But you do have Jewishness as part of your life because life is Jewish. You know, like, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We've spoken about Israel for a bit, but I just want to ask maybe one or two questions about your earlier life, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you mentioned that you spent a bit of time going to the bars and clubs in Soho, and that was a sort of that was an experience where your Jewish side was sort of closeted or sort of put to the side?
I wouldn't say it was closeted. I just, no, I wouldn't say it was closeted. I used to tell people knew. I said people like called me Jewish Paul, so they obviously knew, didn't they? But I was a minority in that minority, if you see what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what was that like, being the minority Jew in this gay world you were a part of?
I wouldn't say that it bothered me hugely. I went to an all-boys school, so people, like, in a very ethnically diverse area. So everyone always constantly took this out of everyone. This is what we did, because we were boys and we were all different. So what do? You just take the piss out of it. Like, seriously, like, I had someone, like, and it's terrible, but this kid, who in fairness was not a nice person, in the chemistry labs, he like sat on the table when he turned the gas taps on. He's like, oh, gas to do, you know. Now, you can do one of two things in that situation. You can get very upset and angry and blah, 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 and then everyone laughs at you and you're the bad guy and blah, 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 right? That's what you learn. Or you can go, sod off, Michael. And that's what I did. And you know, he's fortunate that my family came over during the pogroms and not during the Holocaust, because that might have not been the reaction that he got if it was my mate, you know, whose grandma saw her entire family wiped out, right? Because actually, it's not funny. But, you know, I had people, and you have people throwing like coins at you at school, like pennies at you and covered in silver. And again, you can get very upset or very offended, or you can say something like I did, which was something like, I don't know, if you want to get a Jew's attention, cover it in gold. Like, because you have to kind of just deal with that, because that's what, and they get it too, you know, they get it back because that's what everyone does. It's a very kind of toxic environment, you know. And so I suppose it's similar in the 90s and noughties. It was kind of similar on the gay scene, I guess, because like, it's boys, and boys rip the shit out of each other. Like, they make fun of each other. Boys take the piss out of each other. That's kind of what boys seem to do when they're in groups, even if they're groups of gay boys. It's and so, yeah, so it wasn't just me, it was everyone. And sometimes it got serious, and I didn't react well. I had one guy grab my nose once and say, you know, oh, with a nose like that, you must be Jewish, right? And I won't go into what I said to him, but I wasn't very nice. There may have been threats involving things. And then sometimes people said stupid stuff. And like I said, one guy I remember saying, like I had things like people saying to me, oh, you're Jewish. I'm like, yeah. You never told me you were Jewish. Like, was I supposed to tell you? I'm telling you now. Like, was that a question? Did you ask? You never asked me if I was Jewish. Should I have told you that? Is that, would you like me to wear a yellow star? Like, what do you want me to do exactly? You know, like, did you not see the face? I mean, should I be wearing a kippah? Like, what would you like me to do to tell you? Like, I didn't know that was what I needed to do. So, look, you get that, and you can, I mean, it's upsetting, and again, that's why I moved here. And like I said, you can either get upset by people calling you Jewish Paul, or you can say, don't call me Jewish Paul. Call me Paulie. There's not a Paulie. There's white Paul and black Paul and Asian Paul, Scally Paul. There's like, do you know what I mean? There's all these other Pauls. Just call me Paulie, I-E, at the end of the name. And they did, you know. And you just laugh stuff off because, you know, they'll do it if you're fat or ginger or too skinny, or because gays are vaguely terrible. You know, like, I mean, people in general are kind of terrible. So you just deal with it, don't you? You know, and if you and at some point it gets too much, and you go, I'm going to Israel. That's it. That answers the question.
It sounds like there's a lot of Pauls in your friendship group back in the day.
I wouldn't say that was my friendship group per se. I would say, well, look, I'm English, like there's a lot of Pauls. Again, a great thing here, no one's called Paul in Israel. It's called Paul in Israel. People are like, Paul? I'm like Paul, like Paul McCartney. I'm like, oh, Paul. Yeah.
So,
exotic.
I think this might be the last or the second last question I ask you, because
cool.
It's sort of the moment where your concurrent lives of being, I guess, the token Jew in gay spaces and the token gay in Jewish spaces, when that sort of collided. So you mentioned that when you were introduced to the progressive movement, then a light bulb sort of went off and you saw these two worlds coming together. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, that was kind of a similar sort of thing to this, because there's a lot of gay rabbis and there's a lot of, you know, just politically, it made much more sense to me. People agreed with me more. Not agreed with me, but I agreed more. I agreed with them more. Yeah, I don't know what else to say apart from the fact that I just suddenly felt much more comfortable. Even like being a teacher there, you know, like, and, you know, people knew. And people weren't worried about that, and people didn't care. And, you know, me and my partner were a big part of the community, and we were in the Purenspiel, and we were part of we led the Young Adult Society, and we were, or group, not society, that's a bit much, but, you know, it just wasn't an issue. And I suppose, you know, it was, in general, it was that sort of, like I said, the last few years, I haven't felt particularly uncomfortable being gay in the UK. I felt uncomfortable being Jewish. And so, in a Jewish space, I just felt I'm much better in a Jewish space, to be honest. I don't feel like I need to hide who I am. I don't feel like I need to apologize for myself. For being, you know, opinionated and abrupt and aggressive. So, yeah, I just felt like I could be myself with it. I mean, obviously, I was a teacher, so I had to be, you know, I was working all the time. The thing is, if you work in a Jewish community, if you work on any level in a Jewish community, then you're always working in a lot of ways, you know? You know, like a rabbi. A rabbi is always working. Always. Because they're a rabbi, you know? And when you're the head teacher of a cheder, anytime I went to the synagogue, even if I wasn't teaching, even if I wasn't working, I was the head teacher of the cheder. So I was, you know, you can't get drunk and start swearing if you're the head teacher of the cheder. Do you know what I mean? Not that I do that, by the way. But yeah, so yeah, I just felt very, and I think again it was like a precursor to coming here, and realizing that I don't know, it got me much more involved. I became much more kind of comfortable with my Jewishness and my Judaism, and yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. Is that what you asked? Kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really fascinating what you said, just as a side note about always being switched on, you know, always working when you are working for a Jewish organization, because presumably the people you bump into in your social life, the places you go just throughout the week, some of them might be your clients, some of them might be, you know, things get around. I don't know. It sort of, yeah. I can relate. I work for a Jewish organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're a rabbi, like, look, don't get me wrong. Let's say someone has an affair, all right, a lurid affair. If you have a lurid affair, that's not good. And people know it and people gossip, right? If you're a rabbi and you have a lurid affair, like people talk about it for 50 years later. Until all of those people are dead, you will be gossiping about it. Always. Always. That's how it is. And I know that because I met someone, I met a guy who was a nice bloke and everything. We just like met through mutual friends, and he was from a similar area to me. And so I went home and said to my mum, like, oh, I met some guy. He's like 7 years older, 8 years older. So he went to the same school as me, but I never knew him. And I said, oh, I met some guy. His name's blah, blah, blah. And my mum, the first thing she said was, wasn't there like whose mum had an affair with a rabbi?
So
it was like 25 years ago. And my mum's not really a gossip and doesn't know that woman. All she knows is, doesn't know that woman. All she knows about her is that she had an affair with a rabbi. That's it.
And so
can you imagine
in this kind of environment, I mean, what was it like being the one gay couple? I mean, did people talk in that sort of similar way?
No, people loved us. We were the poster boys. When we were a couple, we were like engaged and stuff. We were like the poster boys for gay Jews. They brought us out for any kind of like. Also, the other thing is my ex did the publicity for Liberal Judaism. So we were like the poster boys. Like when they because we were engaged, when they released the first same-sex couple ketubah, we're the ones that they spoke to. We like in a couple of things, we were like in the newspapers. We had random people coming up to us and going, "Oh, Mazel Tov," and I was like, "What for? What did I do?" Your engagement. I was like, "I don't. Sorry, who are you?" Like, you know, we were really embraced. Like, we weren't like the token anything. I didn't feel like I was the token anything.
I have one final question for you, Paul.
Sure.
I feel like we've had such a comprehensive dive into your life, and it's really wonderful to hear the the journey and the pull and the push of your Jewish and gay identity, and how that's manifested in the various contexts that you found yourself in. I'd like to go all the way back to the beginning, not to your bris. We're going a bit forward than that.
I don't remember that, if I'm honest with you.
It's something we'd all like to forget, I'm sure.
Hopefully none of us ever remember, isn't that the point? I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I have a friend who converted, and he
I mean, that's why we don't. That's why we do it when we're 8 days
we're
old,
very
right?
young.
God.
So going back to the very beginning, you know, you're growing up in this Jewish environment, and you're young, and at some point, you're starting to realize that you have these feelings, and you see the world. Your body sees the world slightly differently to everybody else. And maybe you have the vocabulary to describe it at the time, maybe not. Um, and you know, you've been on this incredible journey finding what it means to be a whole human being at peace with every piece of himself. And you know, today, looking back with all the wisdom and all the knowledge that you've gained, if you had a chance to speak to him,
Oh
what
my
would you say?
God. All right, RuPaul. What would you say there? What would I say to my younger self? Is that what you're going to ask me?
Yeah.
Believe in yourself? No, sorry. What would I say to my younger self? Um, I don't know. Like, I, I don't think I need any advice to give to him. I think everything that I've done has everything I've done has led me to here. Um, if I had come here earlier, I wouldn't have met other people. And although you know we may not be together anymore, you know we've been significant parts of our lives, and we wouldn't be where we are without them. So I was never really like through all of this. What I should say is I never felt like I never felt like everything was going wrong. You know, I never felt like I was all on the outside. I was never really lonely. I was never really depressed. I was never really, you know, like need to get through this. Never really. I mean, maybe at one point in my life, yes, there has been like that, but not because of the gay or the Jewish thing. So I don't know if I would give myself any advice because I think people need to just live their life and they end up where they end up. And you don't want to. Also, knowing myself, if I said something, I'd spend the rest of my life waiting for the moment that happened, and then you miss it. It's like when someone tells you something that happens in a film, and I say, I don't want to know, no spoilers, and they say, no, it doesn't ruin the film. It's like literally that one line that they say. I wait for the entire film. I can't focus on the film. I wait for that one line to come up, and then suddenly I can relax. So if I said something to myself when I was 10, I would then be waiting for however many years until that thing happened before I could relax. And I would miss my entire life. And you know, my life's been fine. I've enjoyed my life so far. And downs.
Wise words.
Yeah.
I want to thank you again, Paul, for being a part of our Pride in the Living Room initiative. It's I think that your words and your story and your experience has an incredible resonance, both for our Orthodox Jewish audience and for all the way to our non-Jewish LGBT plus audience. And yeah, do you have any final words before we part ways?
No, thanks very much for the opportunity, and yeah, I hope it's the sort of thing that you wanted to hear, and I guess I hope it helps somewhere somehow. Yeah,
I'm sure it will. In that case, there's only one thing left for me to say. Here's to sharing our story in this moment and many more moments in the future. Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.